Hi, my name is Lilyin. Today I'm going to be doing a presentation on Leviathan written by Thomas Hobbes, published in 1651. So a little bit of background information on the author Hobbes. He was born in the year 1588 in Wiltshire, England, and on the day of his birth, his mother actually found out that the Spanish Armada had set sail to attack England. This scared her so much that she went into labor prematurely, and this is where his famous words, "Fear and I were born twins together," originates from. Fear is a significant theme in Hobbes' writing, and it provides the framework for much of his philosophical system. Leviathan, published in 1651, is Hobbes' chief work and undoubtedly one of the most influential texts written during the 17th century. It was written in response to the fear that Hobbes experienced during the political turmoil of the English Civil Wars. It was very controversial at the time due to the fact that it was advocating for the restoration of a monarchy at a time when the Republic was at its strongest. So a little background on what the word Leviathan actually means. On the first edition of Leviathan, the cover art portrayed the Commonwealth or the people as a giant human form and the sovereign or the king as the head. Hobbes calls this figure the Leviathan, which is derived from the Hebrew word for sea monster. Leviathan is divided into 4 books, the first of which we're going to be talking specifically about today, chapters 13 and 14 of Book 1, which is called Of Man. Book 2 is called Of Commonwealth. Book 3 is called Of Christian Commonwealth, and Book 4 is called Of the Kingdom of Darkness. So Book 1, chapter 13 begins with Hobbes describing how his theory for peace grows out of his vision of human nature. And basically his vision of human nature is that although people may differ in their strengths of their natural powers, even the weakest is capable of killing the strongest, thus battle is inevitable. From this proposition, he goes on to explain that the natural condition of man is one of continuous war and violence and of death and fear, and this is also known as the state of nature. Although the Hobbesian state of nature is ultimately just a hypothetical, he goes to argue that it is a reality to a degree because it is evident in our mistrust of others, criminal behavior, and in the domination of weak countries by strong countries. He then goes on to explain the 2 things that enable people to escape the state of nature, and the 2 things being fear and reason. Fear makes the natural man want to escape the state of nature, and reason shows him how to escape. Reason provides the natural laws that Hobbes develops later on in chapter 14, which is what we're going to talk about next, which create the foundation for peace. So chapter 14 of Leviathan begins with Hobbes explaining that a law of nature is a general rule that is discovered through reason, and the 2 important things being that it affirms human self-preservation and condemns acts destructive to human life. So the first law of nature basically translates to that natural law demands that we seek peace. And the second law of nature basically translates to that we must mutually deprive ourselves of certain rights. And this mutual transferring of rights is called a contract. By transferring our rights to a mutually agreed upon power, namely through a contract, we satisfy both of these laws. So for example, if you agree not to attack someone so long as they agree not to attack you back, and both people transfer these rights of self-preservation to a common authority, they're satisfying both laws of nature. So the subsequent 17 laws are derived from the first 2 laws of nature, and together these 19 laws of nature are the sum of morality, and the science that determines them is known as moral philosophy. So on to my own personal reflection on this text, the first question being, which moments, scenes, ideas, etc. in this work contributed to your understanding of the culture, values, and society in which it was produced? And in what ways? Be specific. So the theme of fear is upon which a lot of Hobbesian philosophy is centered, and appears frequently in Leviathan. This makes sense as Leviathan was essentially written as a response to the fear that Hobbes experienced during the English Civil Wars. For Hobbes, civil war was the definition of fear itself, and therefore it makes a lot of sense to me that this particular work that presents ideas on how to prevent war was written and published during a time of civil conflict in his home country. The preventative method that Hobbes presents is the idea that civil peace is a result of an ideal commonwealth, and this ideal commonwealth is established through social contract in which a sovereign power, or a king, is responsible for protecting the commonwealth or the people and is granted absolute authority to ensure the common defense. Knowing that Leviathan was written during a time of civil conflict, I can understand that Hobbes was writing from a royalist's perspective in support of the king, and I can also understand that Hobbes was not in favor of the Republic and the Parliament's ultimate decision to behead the king. This act of regicide in particular is a prime example of everything that Hobbes is against and trying to prevent, a cycle of fear and violence and disorder. It's clear to me that Hobbes believed that without the supreme power of King Charles I, England was lost in a constant state of war, a war of every man against every man. Hobbes believed that the dissolution of the monarchy would only result in one outcome, the emergence of anarchy. He believed that without a sovereign power represented by a king, his country would sink into lawlessness and mayhem. Although his political philosophy was definitely not shared by all, it definitely speaks to how polarized the values and the culture of people in England were at the time during the English Civil Wars. So on to the next question. Which moments, scenes, ideas, etc. in this work contributed to your understanding of your own culture and the values of your society? And in what ways? Be specific. So Hobbes' main philosophy that civil peace is only possible under sovereign power drove me to simultaneously appreciate the freedom that I possess under a democracy, but also question the efficacy of a democracy and its ability to maintain peace. In theory, the sovereign power in democracies is the will of the people, and after studying the Hobbesian philosophy and perspective on sovereignty, I'm more hesitant to accept the full validity of the idea that the will of the people can be a sovereign power. In my understanding, the will of the people is a culmination of a vast array of different wills because it's impossible for every single person in the Commonwealth to agree on one single thing. So by saying that the sovereign power in a democracy is the will of the people is to ignore all of the nuances that ultimately affect the entire system of government. Although I don't agree, although his philosophy did make me question the effectiveness of our democracy, I also believe that his opinion that fear is pervasive in a society without an absolute authority is a bit extreme. I believe personally that unconditional love and kindness for our counterparts certainly does exist in our world. However, that isn't to say that fear doesn't exist. So ultimately, I believe that the coexistence of the two means that we can't discount or minimize the impact of one or the other. Therefore, we should still take the necessary protective measures against fear while perpetuating love and maintaining an optimistic outlook, unlike Hobbes, on the nature of human beings. According to the philosophy presented by Hobbes and Leviathan, I believe that although democracy allows for the existence of loopholes which in turn allow for the possibility of fear, a monarchy's total abolition of fear would actually perpetuate the idea of fear, resulting in a society that is absolutely governed and dominated by fear. All in all, I fail to understand how this ideal commonwealth governed by a monarch would work in our society today. I think that the centuries and the long amount of time separating Hobbes' lifetime and our lifetime is in the end a crucial difference that renders a monarchy as a means to securing civil peace in today's society unthinkable. Lastly, would I recommend this text to others? If so, why? If not, why not? Be specific. I would definitely recommend Leviathan to others, although some may not agree with the political philosophy presented in Leviathan. I think it's still objectively one of the most influential texts that helped shape Western philosophy, and many recognize it as the introduction of political science into history. Additionally, Hobbes is super formulaic and logical in his presentation of his ideas, and this makes it nearly impossible for anyone to discredit his work as unreasonable because reason itself is the very foundation of his philosophy. After all, his philosophical method in Leviathan was modeled after a geometric proof, which he got the idea for after embarking on some travels in the 1630s on which he met Galileo. And thus concludes our presentation on Leviathan. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you all next week.